Okay, so my script is called The Other Side. It's about a guy named Will who dies, and he wakes up in this in between. Well, he wakes up in this space that's in between life and death. So like a purgatory, and he's greeted by death, and death is the one who tells him that he died, and death is here to escort him to the other side, which is the afterlife. Um, so, and Will doesn't know uh, where or what this afterlife is. He is just told by death that where they are now, that's the in between, and they need to go to the other side. So Will is obviously really taken aback by this, and he is uh, trying to just come to terms with it. So I feel like during this whole script, he's kind of stalling um, because later on in the script, we meet an older man who also died, and he is taken by death to the afterlife really quickly. Um, so that kind of reveals to us that uh, you can choose when you would like to go to the afterlife when you're in this purgatory space. But Will is still coming to terms with it. So we spend a lot of time between the end of the film where Will actually gets to go to the afterlife and the beginning where, he can't believe that he's died and he's stalling in between the whole film. They travel across a bunch of different spaces. Okay, so here's the mood board. Uh, so we start here. This is what's described as a boring office space. It reminded me of the backroom theory, which is a theory that there are like rooms outside of life where there's nothing. That's what that reminded me of. So it's like a backroom office situation. Well, this tombstone is to symbolize that Will has passed away. And then he's greeted by Death. Death is kind of an unserious character. It's a really comedic entrance. Like there's a smoke machine to set the mood, and he's wearing this cheap Grim Reaper. Well, it didn't say Grim Reaper costume, but it said cheap black costume. And my interpretation was a Grim Reaper costume because that's what people think of when they think of the personification of death. And Will immediately realizes that this guy is kind of just joking around. And that gave me a very man behind the curtain from Wizard of Oz kind of vibe, like when they go to meet the wizard and they realize that it's just a guy controlling the wizard behind a curtain. So that's what this is here for. And Death, after he's exposed, he's revealed as just a guy. He has long brown hair and he's wearing a black hoodie. So he's still associated with black, and he drives a very average car. It's really comedic how Death is just a plain guy, and he just has this plain attire and this plain car. And everything in the afterlife is very dull. Uh, it's described as lifeless, obviously. There's no life in it, so it's lifeless. The world is devoid of color, so a lot of these pictures, the colors are not rich. They travel across a bunch of different natural spaces. There's not a lot of props going on. It's mainly just them traveling around outdoors. Actually, the whole thing, except for this beginning scene, is outdoors. And yeah, so they walk across paths. They go to a lake at some point. They walk through a field and just the woods. It's very natural. Oh, and across this old railroad that's like overgrown with grass. Everything is just really outdoorsy, really natural, but it's stripped of its color. So as you can see in a lot of these, the saturation is really low, very dull, lack of color, not very colorful, as opposed to these, which I'll get to in a second. But we also discuss the concept of death being able to see into the future, and death knows all, and time works differently in this purgatory space. So I just have a picture there that says time is a concept of human perception, which kind of goes with the whole idea of the space being a different space. Time doesn't really work the same way as it does in the real world. And for that reason, it's also always daytime. So all of these spaces, all of these scenes take place in the daytime. When we greet the old man, we see his house. It's still very dull. We greet the guy. He has a scarf. And when death pulls on the scarf, he becomes a young guy. And then death takes him into the afterlife. So here's this, which represents the old guy and his scarf. And here's the old guy's house, which is described to be next to a prairie. So we're keeping with the natural spaces. So as we travel through all of these paths and the woods, eventually, after we meet the old guy, Will finally accepts that it's his time to go. He says that he's not really ready, but he understands that he has to do it. So death guides him towards, Will's afterlife. So it's described as a suspended bridge with a creek. And at this point, the color in the world and the life is starting to come back to Will a little bit. He starts hearing more birds. He starts hearing the creek. He's hearing the nature. He's feeling the wind more than he was before. So this picture is much more colorful than these other ones. And when he crosses this bridge and enters, right before he enters the afterlife, he gets a little bit more color in this part of the woods right here. He feels all the life around him, and then he moves on to the other side. That's the film. Most of it takes place outdoors, like I said, so there's not a huge amount of props. But these pictures, I feel like, capture the essence of the film and the script.